This is the Solid Signal podcast for the week of November 15th, 2021. And the subject of this week's podcast is streaming and TV antennas. You may think these are things that go together about as good as peanut butter and motor oil, but you'd be wrong. Streaming and TV antennas can live together very happily. It's just unfortunate that most folks aren't comfortable doing it. Why? Well, it's funny. One thing I've noticed in the last 10 years or so is that people want more and more to be on a single device environment. In other words, they want to stay in the streaming box or stay in the satellite TV or whatever. They don't want to switch inputs on the TV, which is a shame because it's not incredibly hard to do. But sometimes it does mean picking up a second remote, and with the demise of remotes like the Logitech Harmony series, that is harder to do. And I guess that's just kind of a barrier that some folks aren't willing to cross. It has gotten easier and easier to get on a single device in the last couple of years. Streaming providers, are the popular norm now. People are more likely to turn to Netflix, Hulu, whatever, in a lot of cases. And that's where a lot of the buzz is. I think satellite TV is still strong. It's going to continue strong, probably for decades to come. But it's definitely the mature choice, and it's not necessarily the up-and-coming young hotness as everyone is interested in talking about it. That said, you can get the same kind of content from your satellite system. You can get it on your streaming box using the DirecTV Stream or Sling apps. It's a different service. There is some hope at some point in the future that we'll see a DirecTV app that is essentially a client, but contained within a streaming box environment to compete with what Comcast and Spectrum are doing. But that's in the future. And it's also really not the subject of this particular podcast. Like I said, I want to talk a little bit about antennas and how they interact in a streaming environment. For the most part, if you're using one of the more popular streaming products, we're talking about a Roku or an Apple TV or a Fire Stick, they don't. And that's unfortunate. There is no way to simply hook an antenna up to one of these boxes and have it work as an app. It just doesn't work. Somebody could probably come up with a dongle that would work with the more expensive versions of these boxes, but most of the time, these devices themselves are so self-contained, there's just no way to get something new into it. And, and I get that. You want it to be as easy as possible. But there are options. First of all, there are ways that you can get your local channels into your streaming box if you want to do it. There are devices like the Air TV, and I think TiVo makes one, and Silicon Dust makes one, where you can start streaming your local channels. These are great devices. I use one of them myself, and there are apps you can use. The Sling app is free if you have the Air TV device. If you're using the Silicon Dust device, you have to use an app called Channels, and that's a little bit more expensive, but it's a one-time expense, really not a big deal. So it's still kind of a little bit of a hobbyist thing. Until very recently, we had something called Lowcast, which would put your local channels on your streaming box without even you having to have an antenna if you were in one of the areas that were served by it. But unfortunately, the courts found that Lowcast was not operating legally, and they had to shut down. It was unexpected to everybody. It happened very quickly. So that's out of the question now. There are local channels that are available for, some areas, depending on where you want. There's an app called News On, which will let you watch news channels from all sorts of different places. And there are a couple of apps that will offer free antenna TV, but it's mostly sub-channels, not the networks that you're most likely interested in getting. Those are good alternatives if you're really just trying to focus on the sub-channels. And those are the ones that your satellite provider or your streaming provider won't offer. So you might just want to do that. But all in all, if you want to do something like this, you're still a little bit on your own. It's not quite perfect yet. So I guess I want to get into the real question of why is it so hard to just switch inputs? It really isn't. I think the problem is that, streaming box remotes don't have that input button on them, and as I said, universal remotes are harder and harder to come by. You don't have these self-programming remotes like the Harmony series anymore. There are a few, I guess, you can get on Amazon, but they're not as common, and they're probably not up to the same level of fit and polish. But okay, so you got to change inputs. You got to pick up another remote. It's not that big a deal, and it is worth it. Most modern televisions today not only have an input for an antenna, but they often have a guide and a live TV plus kind of section where you can set things up for an auto tune at a particular time, so you know that you're going to watch stuff. There are even options. Some of the TCL Roku TVs, if you plug a USB stick onto the back of them, you can use them as a simple DVR. There are other DVR options out there too. But I guess the real thing is I'm still trying to wrap my head around why it's so hard to push that input button to pick up just one more remote. Isn't that big of a deal, if you ask me. It is a little bit of a burden, and I wish that it didn't happen. All in all, I would love to get to a point where there was a one-box solution or a zero-box solution that I could really, really endorse, that had a full slate of live TV channels, including locals and sub-channels, and the ability to get into an antenna and access to all the apps that you want. The one-box solutions like Apple TV and Roku and Fire Stick and whatever are great. They are external to the TV, so they're not going to have all the same buttons. And the zero-box solutions, in other words, smart TVs, are great for the first 2 or 3 years that you have them, but inevitably they tend to get more and more obsolete as time gets on, and you end up adding a streaming box to the outside of it. It's just kind of happens. Not an ideal situation no matter what you do. Anyway, I guess I'm kind of ranting because I'd love to hear from any of you or all of you in the comments of wherever you get this video, whether it's YouTube or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or right on the Solid Signal blog, why it is that you think that just having a second remote so you can push the input button and use that remote is such a big deal. With HDMI control or eARC, you often can just have it switch inputs automatically anytime you pick up the right remote. That's not the big deal. You can have the same stuff go out to your soundbar or home theater system if that's what you want. That's not a big deal. It just seems like the big deal is putting down the one remote and picking up another one. And I still don't see that's a huge thing. And I guess, like I said, leave me a comment. Talk to me about why you think it is such a big thing. And we'll go on from there. Maybe I'll answer your questions in the next podcast. Anyway, that's about it for this week. I got to give you that and say, all right, so let's move forward. Do me a favor in the meantime, like and subscribe because it makes me look good to my bosses. Visit the Solid Signal blog and solidsignal.com for all the cool stuff to find out about and all the cool stuff to buy. And I will see you all on next week's podcast. Have a great week.